Okay, so this is a lecture where we're going to dive into the chromoalveolates. And again, remember which key feature makes an organism a chromoalveolate. That's the big star here, and that they may have arisen from one or more secondary endosymbiotic events. So when we look at all members of chromoalveolate, they all have this evolutionary origin. Within chromoalveolates, we split down into two branches. As I mentioned in the last lecture, those would be the alveolates and the straminopilla. So we're going to tackle the alveolates first. So what we need to do, just like we did in the other group, is say, okay, what makes you an alveolate? What puts you in this category? And then within the alveolates, we're going to look at the three subcategories of alveolates and what those things are, the ecological importance, etc., of those subgroups of alveolates. Okay, so to be an alveolate, your big key feature is that you will have this flattened vesicle called an alveoli. It's a bag, a sac. That's I call it, a little vesicle. So on the drawing here, it says alveolar sac right here. Usually these are at the head or the tip of the organism. We need a microscope, a very big, powerful microscope to see it, but all members of Alveolata will possess these little vesicles called alveoli, or the alveolar sac, which contains the little bag or these little vesicles. Within the alveolata will be dinoflagellates, the apicomplexans, and the ciliates. Those are going to be the three subcategories of alveolata. So you can remember alveolata is part of, oh, there's my terrible writing, supergroup chrome alveolates. I would write this out by hand, not on a mouse. So that's our supergroup, the chrome alveolates. And then within it, we have alveolata, and I said we'll get to the other subcategory in a bit. Within alveolata, we have 1, 2, and 3 subcategories. Okay, all right, so let us tackle the dinoflagellates. Let's see what's unique about them. How do these impact our lives? What is a dinoflagellate? Believe it or not, our lives depend upon these guys. Dinoflagellates are single-celled, I'm going to change this, single is much better. Single-celled, single-celled organisms with flagella. These guys are all photosynthetic. All right? So they're running photosynthesis. I want you to reflect back to photosynthesis and think about what is the end product or two end products of photosynthesis. This is why we depend upon these guys for our lives. The ocean contains massive, massive quantities of dinoflagellates. They're a part of the plankton load, producing oxygen. They're part of the food base or producer base in aquatic ecosystems, in running photosynthesis. When we look at them, good diversity across the dinoflagellates. They are going to be aquatic, so these guys will be found in aquatic environments, freshwater and saltwater. Some of them will be bioluminescent. They can glow, have different colors. And some important ones we'll have, and I'm going to move it down here, we'll have a symbiosis relationship with corals. These are known as the zooanthellae. Oh, looks like just leave it down there. Sorry. Zooanthellae. That's a type of dinoflagellate that lives symbiotically with corals, and they run photosynthesis for the coral. They provide the coral with sugars and oxygen. The corals then produce nitrogen and waste products that the zooanthellae use to be able to run photosynthesis. So it's a great relationship. If you've heard of the term coral bleaching, that's when the zooanthellae leave the corals. They physically come out of the coral because the environment is too stressful for them. So as climate change continues to cause the oceans to acidify and temperatures to go up, coral bleaching continues to occur more often and longer bleaching events, and more zooanthellae are leaving corals, causing corals to die. So this group will come back to us when we get to ecology. Also, it'll come back to us when we talk about animals and we talk about corals. So I would encourage you guys, put a little star next to this one, a little tag in your notes. That way, when I ask you, hey, who works with the corals? You can flip back and go, zooanthellae. They're a dinoflagellate. They're photosynthetic, single-celled organisms that have flagella. They're going to live in aquatic environments, and they're bioluminescent. Now, when it comes to reproduction, these guys can run both sexual and an asexual form of reproduction. Sometimes they just divide and now you have two. Other times they pair up. They're not truly sexual because there's no male and female, but they pair up and they exchange genetics with a buddy who happens to have the same same type of dinoflagellate, and they can swap pieces of DNA. So the connection to us that I want you to make, obviously aquatic environments. We have aquatic environments all around us. But a connection to us is anybody who likes clams, oysters, mussels. Dinoflagellates can play a big role in your health and safety if you eat those foods. This is through an event known as red tide. So you go, how does all this connect? So red tide occurs when there is an increase in nutrients, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, NP, goes into the aquatic ecosystem. So it can come from residential runoff, most of it's agricultural runoff, you can have some from urban, industry, etc. But it enters into the aquatic ecosystem, triggering events known as eutrophication. Massive nutrient load comes in, algae populations build up, dinoflagellates will build up their population, and as their population builds, they produce waste product. Well, if it's a small number of dinoflagellates, no big deal. But when you get massive numbers, then you have large amounts of waste product in the aquatic environment. This picture here is actually a red tide event. The ocean, this is a boat. This is the ocean. The ocean looks red because there are so many of these dinoflagellates producing waste product in the waters of the coast that it changes the color of the water, basically creating toxic water because of their pollution, because their population exploded, because they were fed all of these nutrients. So then again, how does this circle back to us? Well, think about if those pollutants are in the water and you have filter feeders like clams. Water goes into a clam, gets filtered out. Clams absorb the particles out of the water, and then the water comes out clean. Well, whatever's in that water, food, nutrients, pollutants, etc., get incorporated into the body of the clam or the oyster or the mussel. So now these are oysters here. These oysters, if they were living in an area of red tide, they have potentially absorbed the toxin. Those oysters get sent to Springfield. They get sold in a restaurant or at a grocery store in Springfield. You eat them. Now you're exposed to that toxin. Anaphylactic shock can happen. Unfortunately, people can get very, very sick and even die from this exposure. So it's all connected. One event triggers the next, which can eventually come back and impact us. Even though we're hundreds or thousands of miles away from the ocean, what we do here impacts the ocean, and then again can come back and impact us directly. So big picture though, dinoflagellates are really good ones. We want these guys out there in normal, sustainable numbers because they do produce oxygen. They're base of the food chain in aquatic ecosystems. Little animals eat them, bigger animals eat the little animals and build on up through the food chain. So if you crash your dinoflagellate population, you can crash the top of the food chain pretty quickly. So things we'll talk more about as we get into ecology and look at how all these things are connected through aquatic ecosystems. All right, the second subgroup within the Alveolata will be the apicomplexans. Now this is a group we don't really like. So the key feature on these guys is their apex, the tip of it, contains an organelle, that little vesicle. That's what makes them a member of Alveolata. But the tip of it has this little structure that allows it to penetrate into the host cell. So this group as a whole are going to be considered parasites. They lead to different human diseases, and they're very, very problematic. When they're in the host, they can spread inside the host through these little infectious cells called sporozoites. They will go through a sexual and asexual stage, and what we'll often see ran out of room. Their life cycle requires 2 hosts. Let me get that down there to complete the full life cycle. All right, so the main one to worry about or concern ourselves with is this plasmodium that causes malaria. Nasty, bad, not a good thing. Let me get, it didn't link. Sorry, hyperlink is broken. So what we're going to talk about with malaria is how this works, the life cycle, and the problems associated with malaria. Obviously, if these guys get inside our red blood cells and rip them up, that's not a good thing. They destroy it. Then they go to another host for another stage of their life cycle. So this is where we can start coming up with strategies to combat malaria. Remember that. I'll find another one for you guys. So the mosquito. The mosquito is carrying the sporozoites in it. It doesn't kill the mosquito. The mosquito is, we call it the vector or the carrier. The mosquito bites a person. So let's follow this path. Mosquito bites us, injects the sporozoites. The sporozoites go down to your liver and they reproduce asexually. And they're rupturing liver cells. And all these little guys called merozoites come out and they keep attacking more red blood cells, destroying it. They can punch their way into your red blood cell with that cap, that apex vesicle punctures in. They reproduce inside the red blood cell. Our immune system can't find them. That's why we can't destroy them. And then they rupture red blood cells, they come out, the immune system tries to chase them down, and then they hide back in your red blood cells. So it's like a game of, as I say, cat and mouse. between the immune system and these guys. Some of them, though, instead of going back into more red blood cells, will mature into gametocytes. And those get picked up by a mosquito when the mosquito bites you. And it sucks your blood. It may ingest the gametocytes, and now those are inside the mosquito. The gametocytes, or gametes, will then reproduce. So male-female gametes reproduce, fertilization occurs, and they create this little structure known as an oocyst. This is basically the offspring of the gametes, and the oocyst will reproduce excuse me, and produce more sporozoites that then can get released into the host, i.e. the human. So medical folks, I want you guys to start to strategize here. How can we stop malaria? Malaria infects and kills millions of people a year. Malaria is in the United States. Malaria will be in Illinois within the next 20 to 30 years because of climate change. You can easily go to Florida, Texas, Alabama, and pick up malaria in the summer. It's not a other country disease. It is in the US. So the concern is, how do we treat this? Do we kill the mosquito? Okay, how? Do you go and spray chemicals? What other species are you killing? Do we treat the person once they've been infected? Well, how do we kill this thing if it goes inside your red blood cell? And then it jumps out and destroys more red blood cells. So maybe we kill a bunch of them when they're in between red blood cells. But if some get in here, they just reproduce and they build up their numbers. So again, we need to come up with strategies, long-term effective strategies that work here. But the apicomplexans all fall under the alveolata because of that apex, that vesicle for penetrating the host cell. All right. Okay, last bit on apicomplexans, just kind of quick overview of a few others. Something that you may come across, there is an apicomplexan called Toxoplasma gondii. These are significant, or of significant concern. If you have a suppressed immune system, these guys can kill you. So somebody who is being treated for cancer, undergoing chemotherapy, anybody has an immune system that's been suppressed, this apicomplexan can be deadly. It can also it can cross the placental barrier to harm the fetus. So pregnant women, stay away from your cats. Do not clean the litter box. Cats can harbor Toxoplasma gondii. Doesn't hurt the cat, but it can harbor it, and then that can potentially be picked up by somebody who's cleaning the litter box, who's working with the cats, primarily through the feces that we would pick it up. But things to be careful of. We may not worry much about malaria, but this is definitely one that's in our backyard, or in our, as we would say, in our house. If we have a cat, the possibility is that we may have this apicomplexan as part of our living environment. So be careful with the apicomplexans, not a group we want to keep around. If we can reduce and minimize their population, we're going to be much healthier.